So this is our reference. Derelict shed, lots of junk around, old car, and you can barely see it on the corner here, but there's also this tractor. Cobalt blue, some browns and some greens. A bit of orange and red for the clouds. And then for the ground, I'll just start with some raw umber. And I'm going to add a little bit of Cobalt Turquoise, just to give it a hint of green. That'll do. Some very weak permanent rose. You don't have to do this. You could just use, the white paper for your clouds. But I have some very weak cad orange and very weak permanent rose, just to give the cloud a little bit more body. While the paper's absorbing the water, let's just mix a brighter green, because we'll use that in the foreground. Just some aureolin and Cobalt Turquoise, some raw umber. I have a big cloud here. Oops. Maybe a smaller cloud here. So all I'm concentrating on is the shape of the edge of the cloud here. Okay, that's better. I'll have another cloud there, I think. Then I'll get some clean water. I'll grab a bit of the cad orange, again very weak cad orange, mainly pushing the brush. Then go on with the very weak pink, permanent rose. But I make sure I don't lose all these little highlights. Except for this one here, I don't know. This part here looks a bit strange. Just soften those edges. Go in with a bit more blue up here, just to give these shapes a bit more body. Then I'll drag this weak mixture. So this bottom of the cloud area is lots of water with some of the other three colours in it. We've got this little window here, we'll put some paint there. So there's our sky. We don't need to dwell on it any more than that. And then we'll go into the ground. I wanted to paint around the roof of that shed, so I've just dried it. This should work. So there's that distant hill, which is reasonably soft edge. But I'll pick up a bit of raw umber, a bit of this green, and just throw a couple of lines in there just to give them a bit of interest. Then we're going to come forward going to have some grasses here, so I'm just dropping in some brighter greens. Now I'm going to add some raw umber. I'm going to take a moment to paint around these chooks. Good. Vary these colours. I'm going to start by adding a little bit of this burnt sienna. Quick brush strokes. A bit more raw umber. Maybe a bit of this green too. Turquoise. Go in with a brighter green. And I'll get my size 8 brush. We'll throw in some more texture in the foreground. For splatter, you want thicker paint, but you can also use water. It depends on what effect you want to create. But if you want darker marks that sort of roughly stay where they are, then you want thicker paint. Not that thick that it doesn't come off the brush. Maybe some brighter green. just painting through and around some of these white areas to create these sort of darker lines. But again, they have to be done while the paper is still quite wet. What I'm going to do is just lift where this bright green is going to go. I'm just going to lift some of that paint so that I can end up with quite a bright green here. And a little bit here. Got some Cobalt Blue, but I'm adding a lot more water to it just to make it quite a bit weaker. I'm going to use a little bit of cerulean. I like the different blue on the car. It's a slightly bluey green colour. Just some weak cerulean. And the tractor is this sort of orangey yellow. In my palette, when I clean the top of my orange, I just throw the dirty orange in here, and that gives me a nice dirty orange. If you don't have any dirty orange, just get some of this orange and add a tiny bit of burnt sienna to it and a bit of cobalt. And I'll get some Scarlet Lake. There's some nice red in here. Just drop a bit of that in. Red down here. Leave that there for now. Okay. And this roof, I'll get some burnt sienna, a little bit of Scarlet Lake, a little bit of permanent rose, just to make a rust colour. This is a wet on wet effect. And you make sure the rust is running in the direction of the corrugations, right? And this car has some, but it's more of a burnt sienna colour. Well, the other colour could have been burnt sienna too. This colour will dry duller anyway. Just going to drop in a little bit of rust around here, without being too careful about it. All right, so while that's drying, let's work on the foliage. So we've got the big poplars, they're a darkish green. One thing we have to keep in mind is I've changed the light in this painting. From an overcast sky, I've added a lot of light, so my greens have to be brighter than what's in our reference. Into the dull green I had here, I'll just add a lot more Cobalt Turquoise and Aureolin. And also raw umber. And French ultramarine. And here we'll make this a brighter green. Lots more Aureolin, a little bit of turquoise. And there are two colours. I think that will work well. Now we've got some trees in the distance which I quite like. They help define the edge of the hill. And for those, it's not going to be a bright colour. I'll just mix some of this darker green with this leftover cobalt blue. And that will do two things. One, it'll dilute it, and two, it'll add some blue to it, which will cool it down a bit. So we'll throw in some of those. Not too much paint in your brush. If your tree finishes as a sharp edge, that reads like it's on the other side of the hill. If it comes down a bit below the top, obviously it's on this side of the hill. Vary their size and positioning. And clump a few together too. All right, that's fine. We can always throw one or more trees in here if we need to. Under this roof line, I'm going to get some of this sort of yellowy orange dirtied up with a bit of cobalt blue. Let's say it's full of hay bales. That'll do for now. We can throw in a bit of detail later. Get my fan brush. Try to avoid putting your biggest trees right at a corner. Now I'm going to have some darker areas in this. I'll just grab some French Ultramarine and raw Umber. And I'm really just looking for creating an interesting pattern here. I'm going to pick up some of this brighter green, just add some of that to the top. few little dabs in the dark, 'cause there'd be some branches picking up a little bit of the brightness. We've got this little brighter tree here. Normally I'd use a size 12 brush for that, but because some of these shapes are quite small, I'm going to use a size 8. Now I'll go in with this darker green. Now I'll get my fan brush, and this time I'm going to just drag some of that green down, just to give me a broken edge. That'll become grass later. Now here I've created a bit of a triangle shape, so I'm going to break that up. Start by pushing it out this way a bit. Get rid of some of that darker paint. Keep my trusty credit card handy. No. Let that dry a bit more. That'll do. I know that in the reference the light's mainly coming from the top, but in our painting we're going to put a little bit of an angle so that, you know, put the light on a bit of an angle so the light's going to come through this way. Either way, this building's in shadow, so that we don't have to concentrate too much on detail. The wood's well weathered, a mixture of greys with hints of browns in them. So we don't need to mix a lot, however, because this is quite a small shape. So why don't we see what we've got here. I'll just mix those colours together. So greys, as soon as you hear the word grey, you know that all the primary is going to be together, so you can quite often mix it into colours that are in your palette. In this case, we've got some Cobalt Blue, some burnt sienna, and there's a hint of green in there, so I'll add some permanent rose. The permanent rose is only used if this comes up with a bit of green. And in this paint well here, we'll just mix a darker tone of that. Oops, not that. So Cobalt Blue, burnt sienna, and that's a darker tone. That works well. And it's a small shape, so I'm just going to paint with my size 8 brush. Remember, we've got these little glimpses through these windows, the ground and the background. And here I've got this tree and got these lovely broken edges on it, so I'm going to just paint around some of those. Paint around these shapes here, which will become some sort of rusty bins and that. And I'll get my fan brush. I'm just going to break up that edge. And throw in some darker marks over here while we're at it. You could do this later, but you know, just while I had the brush in my hand. We'll get rid of some of this green. If you've got a choice between getting rid of a light green or a dark green, it's better to get rid of the dark green, because you can always make the light one darker. I want some rust colour, so burnt sienna, a bit of Scarlet Lake, a bit of permanent rose. And some cobalt blue just to dull it off. Just dropping in hints of shapes down here. Later I'll probably go in and paint over them with some sharper edges. We'll let that sit there. It needs to dry before I go in and throw in some detail. Let's work on the car. We'll use the same grey for the windscreen. And then just some quite thick burnt sienna and French ultramarine. Just for around the edges. Now it's important to see what I did there. What I didn't do is do a big dark black shape all the way around. See how I've broken the edge, meaning it's not one consistent dark shape. Maybe darken that there. Because if we look at the reference, if you look at it, it's not one flat shape, and even this dark line going all the way around, it varies in thickness, and in some areas, like here, you can't even see it. Too often people paint the dark area around a windscreen and they go in with a really heavy black line, and it just doesn't look right. And it's going to be dark underneath the car. I'm just working on these while this dries. I could run this to the hairdryer, We'll do a bit of work on the tractor while we're waiting. Not putting in a lot of detail. And then I'll get my fan brush, and here I want to drag some of this dark down just to hint at grasses. And if we look at the black tyres, see how they've got highlights on them where the light's hitting them. So now we'll just get a small brush again, clean it. And just lift a highlight. Just some dry brush strokes for the grill. We've mixed this reddish brown colour. We'll use that for some of the textural lines. a little highlight underneath the tractor I want to retrieve, but I'll do that later, I think, with a credit card. Still not quite dry enough. All right, I'm going to go and hit that with a hairdryer now. This is dried enough now that I can continue. So I'm now going to put in some detail, and then we'll finish it off, finish the buildings off anyway, and the cars and that with the shadow. So let's put in the detail. If you leave little gaps like these here, they do two things. One, they add a bit of character to the painting, they add a bit of depth, and it sort of says there's something in there, right? Whereas if you totally block it out, you lose that extra nice little dimension to your painting. It's what I call a nice to have rather than a must have. And there's the hinge there I'm going to just paint in a rusty reddish colour, not too bright. Here we're looking into this space, so I'm going to drop in a bit of red back here. Who knows what that is, just to say, you know, it could be machinery or something like that. I'm also going to darken some of the area with the same French ultramarine and burnt sienna. And that'll just help establish this as a foreground shape. Same here, these are darker. There's a gap in the roof there which I've missed out on. It's okay. Break up that edge. These shapes could be darkened a little bit here and there too, vary the colour. Clean that, and this, because this is a doorway, there's a slight overhang which makes that partially in extra shadow. I'm going to get a bit of cerulean, just dull it with a bit of this grey. There's a piece of corrugated iron there. Then I'll go in and drop in some darks. That's enough detail for the shed, but I'll spend a moment with this structure here. Not a lot of detail because you really can't see a lot of detail there. I'm going to get just a weak grey just to darken underneath there a fraction. That'll do. Chickens. They still have to have a shadow put under them. Burnt sienna by itself can make a useful rust colour. Adding Scarlet Lake and Permanent Rose just for variety, it's not critical. We don't know what these shapes are, but there's a lot of junk there anyway, so just quick dry brush strokes. Pick up some of this dark colour. The light's going to be coming from here, so shapes away from the light will be darker. Pick up my fan brush, drag some of that down. Not too much. Add a little bit of detail. I'm going to use some of this dark grey to just define this fence a bit better. Don't lose all the highlights. I'm just darkening underneath the highlight. Not too much. Now, underneath the car would be even darker still, so I'll just get some French Ultramarine and burnt sienna. Just a little line like that. And I'll get my fan brush and just rake that up. And I think where these drums would be, there'd be darker areas still. We've got some shapes on the wheels, which we'll use a combination of lifting and drawing in. And then here we've got the grass and darker areas beneath the tractor. So for that, just get my fan brush. You've got to make sure the hairs in your brush are laid out quite a bit. If they clump together when you do this, instead of getting little grass shapes, you'll just get a solid mass. You don't need to put in all these marks, just a few. Then here, there's all this machinery in that, so this is where your dry brush strokes come in. Just quick. And darken this area because that then brings that tire forward. Same here. Quick dry brush stroke, all of a sudden we've got a much more interesting shape. This area here is a fairly solid mass. This is where I would get a sharp edge. Because they're just blades of grass, you're justified in using, very sharp edge in your credit card. As long as it's lost its shine, and just little flicks like that. See how that adds some nice light there. I'm also going to lift just little gaps. For the shadow colour, let's get some water. All right, we're just going to start with some French Ultramarine and a little bit of permanent rose. Not too much permanent rose. And then a small amount of burnt sienna just to grey it off a tad. A small amount. And you do have to test it. Maybe just a little bit more burnt sienna. This is too dark, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. That's better. Leave space down below so you can put in the grass shapes. Some of this tree would be in shadow there. This comes down to here. Some of this will be in shadow. Now, very quickly get my fan brush and drag some of this paint down. There'd be grasses under here that are in shadow. Some would be in light as well, so don't lose the light either. Now you can see the light through these windows. It's a bit too stark, however. I'm going to hint at something in the background. I think there's some sort of buildings there anyway. think that looks a bit more interesting. And here I'll soften that edge, pick up some of this shadow. This side of the car will be in shadow, and it will have a cast shadow. The same with these. Part of the drums would be in shadow. Same with the front of the chickens. This side of the tractor would be in shadow, not all the way to the top. And then before this all dries, we'll go in and soften these edges. The back of this car would be in shadow. These chickens would have a little bit of a shadow. The chickens, I'll use my fan brush because it just hints at grass. I lifted some of the rust colour from the drums and have to put it back in. That'll do. Now, one thing I haven't done actually is this roof has some rust on it. I've put a soft underpainting, but now it needs just some dry brush strokes to add a bit more texture to it. So just a bit of burnt sienna and Scarlet Lake will do for this. And the same with this car, it's just a bit more rust. And I'm going to take a moment to fix this chicken's neck. It's a bit too big. That'll do. Now, let me just step back. I'm going to lift a little bit of colour off the top of this tractor. I would have liked to retain some more light there. And I'll get my stiff brush, take out most of the water. And I'm just wetting that top layer of shadow to bring up some of the brighter underpainting. If you've enjoyed this painting, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.